There were a couple of questions, and I'm going to read some of them out about once we use this methodology to cross cultural lines, how much we can still integrate the Chinese market with the global market. So I am going to come to Neil's question later, who asked about the status of international managers in China. First, I would like to look at the other way around. Do you have the feeling that international companies, when they recruit Chinese managers for their operations in China, do they have the grooming of these managers for later international positions out of China in mind? Do they assume that a good general manager who runs the Chinese business further down the road, they could become international managers in headquarters, or they could be sent to another location, just like, people from, let's say, India or the Philippines very often end up working somewhere else if they are a multinational?
For the smaller companies, generally no, okay, with exceptions. For the larger companies, definitely yes. They have the resources, they need the people, they have many locations where they could use talent, and talent is, people who can make a success of an operation. So I would say, yeah, the larger companies, definitely that's true. The rub comes with Chinese who don't want to go overseas. I know many of my candidates who don't want, for instance, an APAC position based in Singapore, or a global role based in Tokyo. They don't want it. They want to be in China. It's and I think in all of this, it gets lost, but you really have to understand what are Chinese executives thinking? What's their context for how they view the world? If you don't understand that, you're just really at a loss, and you'll spin through people because you'll recruit them, and the basis for recruiting them won't be intrinsic, it'll be extrinsic, right?
Yes.
So
this is exactly what I had in mind, because there are studies that if you look at the same level, the same functional title, a Chinese manager is much less likely to want to relocate abroad than certainly a Western one, but also a Japanese one or an Indonesian one. This is one. And this is one of the reasons why I think China is heavily underrepresented in the global management community. You have much more Indian managers in Western multinationals all over the world than Chinese ones. So if I understand correctly, and very often intercultural leaders or intercultural leadership experts, they try to do this the other way around, how to take the, let's say, air quotes, average Chinese manager and give them a more global, more internationally friendly mindset. But your methodology with these scorecards that you mentioned, it seems to do it in a different way. It assumes, listen, there is enough talent in China, but let's kind of pre-select the ones who are comfortable with this international, fairly transparent mindset. Do I have the right understanding?
Yes. And what you actually are pre-selecting for is people who have opted to go into multinational companies because deep down inside, they respect meritocracy, they respect performance, and they are capable, and they think they can do well in that kind of a system.
Yes. And suddenly it becomes very clear to me where you add value, because what I see in international companies, I mean, I'm engaged as a leadership consultant at the later stage. Nobody asks me if they want to put a manager in place, but once they are in place, they ask me to be their coach or to take their team and train them or advise them on their strategy. But very often what I see with international companies is that first they pick the Chinese manager based on their performance track record or their certifications or where they worked before. And then they find out that they are not a good fit for this kind of mentality, this kind of internal culture. If you go upstream, so to speak, and say, yeah, it's okay. Pick the manager based on how much revenue they brought in their previous jobs and what kind of certifications they have. But there is this one additional criteria. Do they fit this scorecard? Then basically you can weed out candidates who would be culturally or temperamentally a problem later on, and you can save a lot of headache, heartache, and loss of money.
Yeah. But there's another element here. So even if you pull these guys from multinationals, and that's why I advise that. So your description is very accurate, Gabor. But there's another element here, and that is by the time these guys get to be, in their mid 40s, let's say, they're sort of at the height of their career prowess or really, really hitting their stride. Their parents are in their late 60s, right? So
they need support.
Family is everything in China. It's very tight.
Right.
You don't put your mother in an old age home and go to New York. That's just not on. That doesn't happen here. I'm sure it happens, but for the most part, all of these executives that I talk to feel a great deal of responsibility to their parents who are aging and want to be close.
A lot.
Yeah.
Right.
So for that reason, just at the time when they might be asked to take an international posting, they might not want to do it. And then earlier on, their kids are in school and at a critical phase, and that's the next generation. So they want to be close to home, and they want to have that child in the Chinese system, educational system.
Yeah, and then at that time, those people are senior managers. They have some money in the bank. They have a home or two. It's very difficult to motivate them to do something that doesn't come from the belly. Law, you have a question. Feel free to unmute your mic and ask Michael and me.
Hi, yeah, nice to meet you. So, my last name is Luo. That's why I usually write it first, but my given name is Jin.
Okay, that's what I saw. Sorry about that.
No problem. So, so I'm Chinese and I have been living in Germany for a while. And before that, I moved abroad when I was, so I moved out when I was 18. And what I see in myself and many people around me is that there is actually a very high desire to move abroad. For example, my parents really wanted me to go away because they think, foreign universities are better. And then I see other young people feeling the same. Also, I think with the zero COVID policy, there are more and more people looking to move abroad. So I was actually a little bit surprised to hear that there are many Chinese managers who are not willing to move abroad. And in my mind, one reason can get them abroad is that their kids have a chance to attend Harvard, for example, because they really care about this. So I wonder if this, this in general, this desire to move abroad, and especially this high quality of education that Western countries can provide, does this play a role in this hiring process?
Good question. Let me just make an observation about your question, because there's certain points of it that are quite interesting. The children of all these executives will almost undoubtedly all go abroad for university. So you're absolutely, you hit the nail on the head there. And they are making arrangements for those children to do that. But there's probably no better place to prepare for that than China right now. There's a whole industry, billions and billions of dollars worth of tutoring. My kids are involved in this as well. Online tutoring for math, for English, for history, for whatever you want, with tutors from around the world. Okay, so that's the generation that's being prepared by these managers to go overseas, and that. Yeah. But as far as their own careers are concerned, their money-making ability is centered in China. Their families are all here for now. They will send the kids off when that time comes, or if it's already come, but they themselves will stay in China. They will not follow the children and go overseas. I don't know anybody who's planning that. And, I just wanted to add, these Chinese executives who are successful really, and maybe it's true elsewhere in the world, but I really see a pronounced perspective here that they treat their careers like an athletic career. I've got 20 seasons to make good, okay? And the first thing I need to be doing is establishing myself as rookie of the year, and then somewhere along the line, early along, I got to get an MVP. And I've got to get recognized, and there's tremendous pressure here to perform. And you see these young guys coming out of university or their MBAs. The pressure on them is something I think the rest of the world just does not understand at all. If you come out, most of the guys I deal with come out of the single child policy period, right? Which means they're the only sons, and they have a wife to support, they have a child to support, they have 2 sets of parents to support. And all the pressure is on them, because in order to win a wife, you have to have a house, you have to have a car, you have to show a business card that everyone can recognize. There's a huge amount of social pressure and financial pressure on these guys. They do get support from the upper generations, but there's still an enormous amount of pressure on them. And so once they get to the period of their careers where they're really pulling in good money because they've been successful and recognized, then they want to stay here and they want to maximize that. It would be very hard for them, for instance, to pull, and they're getting paid like expats used to get paid. So coming back to Neil, those guys are the new expats.
Right.
They can operate in English, they can operate in Chinese. They can fathom the culture here, and they can make it understandable to headquarters. They're tremendously agile, and those guys they could go overseas and be competitive with world-class managers, but their real advantage is here, and smartly, they really want to stay here. I think that's part of the reason.
Right.
Their commercial advantage is here.
Another way to put the same message is that not wanting to go abroad is the mainstream culture in China, and there is a very strong subculture of international existence. So if you look at why affluent and powerful Chinese families want to send their kids abroad, is because in Chinese education, they learn how to be great followers, but in international education, they learn how to be winners. And if you look at the culture of these big population centers in China, like Beijing and Shanghai and Shenzhen, if you want to make it there, you must be a winner. So if you go to a British school or an American school, you actually get a mentality, a value system, a kind of education that prepares you for this extremely competitive subculture. Now,
well, I would argue,
yes.
I would argue, even if you go to even more so if you go to a public school, Jin could test. Well, maybe she's been in Germany too long, but your whole life revolves around the Gaokao.
Exactly.
The high school test that gets you into university, right?
Yeah, I actually think the public schools are more competitive than the international ones, because usually the international school kids are from rich families already, and then they know that they'll go abroad. But then we didn't know, and then we have to fight for. For example, in the province, there were 300,000 people in the Gaokao that year, and then 100 can get into Peking and Tsinghua. So,
yeah. So there you go. Exactly.
Yeah. First of all, my experience with international companies is that really, like, a lot of people who are promoted to management role, they don't want to settle abroad for the aforementioned reasons. But let's say there are those 1 or 2 who are willing to take any kind of hurdles to start an international career. And let's face it, even if 1 out of every 1,000 managers from China wants to create this kind of career path, it's an awful lot of people. So it's again, they are going to create a very competitive subculture. And I personally hope that this subculture that you actually belong to is going to be successful, because I think we don't just need this kind of interaction within China. We would really need able-handed, internationally trained Chinese managers in those headquarters, because that would save a lot of pain for the company and help them avoid a lot of mistakes.
That's a great point. That is absolutely true. I didn't mean to say that it's no one takes these international positions, but you're right, very few do. What I see more of, and remember, I'm looking at the world through a keyhole, only through a very limited number of clients, right? But what I see more of is a sort of a soft approach to that, where someone is asked to, can you go for 4 months or 6 months or 18 months to India? We have an operation there that's in trouble.
Right.
You take your expertise and a small team down there and help these guys out, right? And so they go and they get that experience, and they come back. Or if they're in a large company like Caterpillar, man, you could find yourself in Singapore this year, in Brazil next year, in Poland the following year, and back to China. I mean, so those guys really get the tour.
Exactly.
And they're loyal enough to the companies that they will either put up with it or try to enjoy that. GE is another one that's famous for that, those rotations.
Thank you very much for this. We slowly have to wind down, and then a couple of participants have already left. But I think we